Okay, here we go. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining. I'm excited to be doing the third Israel's Most Daring Operations today, this time about Eli Cohen, who I think has an incredible story, and I think more people know about the story because of The Spy, the short mini-series that Sacha Baron Cohen appears in. And we'll be talking more about that today. And that'll be the main focus as well. But first, of course, we'll be focusing on the operation side of the story, and then the modern adaptations as well, as we've been doing up until now in this series. Just a few technical things before we begin. Please make sure to keep unmuted. I think for whatever reason, I did not mark the thing to be muted when you come in. So therefore, just be aware if you're muted, unmuted. And I'll just note that yesterday I had a problem that my Zoom stopped working, or all of a sudden someone didn't hear me. So if you, for whatever reason, don't hear me, please unmute and say something. And if for whatever reason I have to, my Zoom isn't working, I'll use the chat. I might have to, I really hope this doesn't happen, but I'm just going to say in advance, I might have to go in, come back in, but it works. It'll be a few seconds and we'll continue where we left off. I really hope it doesn't happen, but just have to say it just in case. Okay. Other than that, I'm, as usual, going to share about Life Online. And I don't know if I already copied it. If not, here we go. So basically, Life Online is a project that I've been a part of that is done with other Israeli emissaries in different areas, also the DMV, but also from various places like Pennsylvania, Minnesota, New Hampshire. And I put the links in. We have a community that we basically create together. I'm in charge of the bi-weekly email. And it's basically another way to have great content like this, but by other people who are good at other things like cooking, which I am not, for example. So feel free to fill out the form or check out our Facebook group. I really personally recommend it. And they're friends of mine who I know do incredible work. So I'll just say that the Mossad book that I've been showing, that unfortunately I don't have right next to me, is the one that that I've been an inspiration for this session. And I will send, like last time, a list of materials if you've signed up and if you've registered, then I will send the materials like last time. And with that, I will now just begin, and I will dive right into Eli Cohen's story. First, again, we'll be talking about the operation side, his own personal story, and then going into the modern adaptations that we see afterwards. Okay. Wonderful. So Eli Cohen's story actually starts in the 1950s in Egypt. His family is from there, and he and his family were very Zionist. And during this time, Eli Cohen was someone who was very charismatic and charming. He was confident and he was outgoing. And these are actual pictures of him from the 1950s in Egypt. This is him, and actually the one in the shadows is him as well. And during this time when they were in Egypt, first of all, he would help smuggle Jews out of Egypt to Israel and help them make Aliyah. And in addition, the British were in Egypt at the time, and he was a part of a group of boys who were actually operated by the Mossad in order to do small little operations and blow up stuff because the Mossad naively thought that this would remove the British from Egypt in that case. Very naively, that they thought that these little, blobs would actually remove completely Egypt from the British from Egypt. And so what happened was that because there was amateurish work by really young boys who didn't know what they were doing, they eventually got caught. And Eli Cohen, being smart and cunning and charismatic, he was able to hide all the materials that he had that would have the police, find out that it was him, that he was involved in these things, whereas his friends did not had evidence that they were involved, and they were put on trial, and two of them were hung. And this is in.
Oh, I'm being sure.
Here, one moment. I will mute people. One moment. Okay, there we go. So, and then so this was in 1955, basically, that he was caught, and his other friends that were caught were put in jail for life sentences, and again, two of them were hung. So it's important to just be aware that that he was involved very much early on with the Mossad, and he had those connections, and he was very Zionist. He was helping, Jews smuggle into. He was helping bring families and his own family into Israel, and believed that was, the ideal for Jews to be in. And himself, because of his involvement, he didn't move to Israel immediately. He waited 2 years. And in 1957, he eventually moved to Israel, and he worked in this place that we see here. It's called Hamashbir. It's basically a department store. So he worked in the behind the scenes analytic department. So it wasn't, it was a clerk job, but he was a little bit higher up and not working in the department store itself. In 1959, he met Nadia, and we see here their actual wedding. And it was during this time as well, in 1959, that he was approached by the Mossad. Now, there are various versions and opinions as to how he agreed to join the Mossad. And there are two versions that basically we have. One is that he originally was offered to join the Mossad because of his background and his personality, but he said no originally because he said that he was just got married, and he still had a job, and he didn't want to join the Mossad. And only when he lost his job did he agree to join the Mossad. However, another opinion actually says that he got into the Mossad, but because of he was too overconfident, and he was too charismatic, and not really thinking out through his actions, so that he actually didn't pass the tests, and only later on was accepted into the Mossad. So those are the two opinions about how he actually was recruited to the Mossad, but it's really important to be aware of his original background, and not that he was just, Israelis randomly going up to this Egyptian person. Okay. So afterwards, this is in 1959 that he accepts this Mossad position, and he begins training. They have a particular, oops. Sorry about that. I'm just gonna mute people. There we go. Okay. So this is 1960, and his training begins. So what we have is that he begins a variety of training. First of all, as we see, these are actual pictures of him during his training of spying. He was followed after, and they did various drills of him, being followed and having to pay attention and know who exactly had an eye on him. And in addition, he was trained to learn about military material, tanks, units, about just military content generally. Also about weapons, also about positions, also about really anything you can think of regarding military knowledge that he had to have, he was taught. And then in addition, he was also importantly taught how to use radio and radio signal, and Morse code as well, because that was the way he was going to communicate with Israel from wherever he was going to go. At this time, of course, while he's going through this training, he has no idea where he's going to be sent to, what his assignment is going to be, but he knows he's training for a position in which he's going to go into a foreign land. And basically, he passes his training, and he returns home in September 1960 and has a daughter named Sophie. I think, does that appear? No. has a daughter named Sophie, and he visits them for a few months. And afterwards, he is taught about Islam and Quran by a sheikh in Israel. And he's basically told by the sheikh to say that he had a secular upbringing and therefore doesn't know the specifics about Islam, but really to try stay off the subject because you could probably tell that he was not raised Muslim. And with that, afterwards, he is given his name, his identity. So his name is Kamel Amen Thabit. His story is that he moved with his parents and his family from Syria to Buenos Aires in 1947. And they were in the textile business. Both his parents passed away, and ever since then, he has been a successful businessman. So this is the story that he is going with into Buenos Aires, which we can see. Sorry about that. There we go. Which we can see right here. So this is an important locations that he was at during his trip in Buenos Aires. So the reason that they actually sent him there first, not immediately to Syria, was because they wanted him to base himself among the Syrian Arab community that was located there. And there were strong ties between South America to Syria, as you will see very shortly in the continuation of the story. But it was very important for them to have those ties initially before actually going into Syria. So at this time, Eli Cohen, or Kamil Amin Thabit, is a successful businessman who is making all the ties among the Arab Syrian community in Buenos Aires. This over here is the Syrian Arab Club, and this is a coffee shop that they would often meet with leaders in the community. So this businessman, being a businessman, he would donate money to various organizations, to charitable causes among the Arab Syrian community. And in addition, he started to make connections in various parties. And in one of those parties as well, he met the military attaché to the embassy, who is Amin al-Hafez, which, remember, that name will be important later on. So Amin al-Hafez. And shortly after meeting the military attaché, and really we can see that his network has expanded and become very substantial in Buenos Aires. He tells his friend, a reporter, Hassan, that he really wants to return to Syria. He has a desire to return back to his roots and to, really be a true freedom, fighting for freedom and being in the homeland. So he says, but I need recommendations to go in. So he receives recommendations through this reporter friend Hassan from all these people in the leadership and known people from the Syrian Arab community in Buenos Aires to go to Syria. And with that, on the way to Syria, he drops by Israel, has a few months with Nadia, his wife, and his daughter Sophie, before his next part of the trip, which was the main part of his operation, or his mission, which was to go into Syria, basically. Also, another thing was that this was an important time for him to have additional training before going into Syria, basically. And now, how did he actually get into Syria with all the materials and tools? So he actually had a Syrian spy who thought that he was involved with extreme right-wing Germans, and therefore helped him to smuggle all the tools and materials that he needed for being a spy himself in Syria. So meaning all the, equipment of radio and, papers and files and all those things that he brought with him, he was able to smuggle through this other Syrian spy. And also the important thing to note is where he's located. So this is a map. I know it's written in Hebrew, but this is a map of where he was located. So A is where Eli Cohen's apartment was, and B is the point where there was a Syrian army base, and also the Syrian Air Force. Now, why is that important? Because as being an army base, they would send out a lot of radio messages, and they would be using the system all the time, using radio waves. So that means when Eli Cohen would send out a message to Israel, it would be, hidden under all the other radio waves that were sent from the military base. So it was, and also it's a strategic location for Eli Cohen to be reporting from. So that is also an important location to remember. Also the fact that he was really right near an army base, but also more importantly, that his radio wave was going to be hidden under the army base radio waves. And that was the idea behind his location as well. So as we saw in these pictures, this is December 1961, that he's in Syria. In the middle, we actually see a postcard that he wrote to his family. And this is from the balcony of his apartment. He writes to Nadia and my family, yours, Eli. So he actually wrote a postcard from Syria to his family. And we can see here really the fact that Kamil Amen Thabit, or Eli Cohen, really made incredible successful connections in Syria. And exactly how did he do that? So a few things happened, and I think we had one moment. There we go. Before actually, one more thing is that regarding the location and the radio, so he was that what Mossad told him that he's supposed to report every night, and sometimes he would send radio messages once or twice a day as well. So that's important to remember, that he would really send messages pretty often. Basically, Eli Cohen was coming in a time to Syria that was very tumultuous and unique, because Syria at the time was going through revolution after revolution, and at the moment they had gone through their last revolution in September of 1961, and this revolution was so meaningful or noteworthy because it cut the ties between Syria and Egypt, which Egypt was at the time a real powerhouse in the area, and the fact that they had cut their ties was very noteworthy at the time. And also, considering that 1967 is when the Six-Day War happens, and really just a few years later, this fact was really, important for Israel to know what is actually going on with Syria and who their ties are with and what their opinions are regarding Israel. And so at this time, Eli Cohen got himself involved with military, government people, and business and leaders in business. So leaders in basically 3 fields, and he would have 3 ways that he would get his information and make his connections. So one, because of his recommendations and his connections he already had from Buenos Aires, so he was actually invited himself to a lot of different parties, and that were for leadership. The second thing was that he would actually arrange his own private parties where there would be a lot of beautiful women invited, and he would invite, certain people of the leadership to come as well. Eli Cohen would actually pay the women or tell the women to pass him any information that they got while they were with a certain leader. So that did happen as well. And Eli Cohen was also actually pouring money into these parties, really truly being the successful businessman that he was. So really, take into account the fact that this Mossad agent had the means and the money in order to really keep his image and his reputation about, who he really is as this successful businessman. And the last thing was that his rhetoric, or what he would say, was very anti-Zionist. He would say things like, oh, we're doing nothing, or, we're not on the border. How are we going to ruin these Zionist people, that they're taking over us, and we have nothing compared to them, and we're not doing anything, and would complain. And being charismatic, he would basically be invited to the border with Israel to actually see himself what was going on. So we have here the two pictures on the side. One that he is in an actual Syrian plane. The other side that he's taking a picture from the Syrian border, and we see Israel behind him. And this was incredibly valuable information because he was actually seeing firsthand what the situation was also with the government in Syria, and also with the military, of course, as well. And during this time, after a few months or after about half a year, 8 months, he would go back and forth with visits in Israel. And he also had a baby boy and girl, Irit and Shai. So he has 3 kids altogether. And I'll stop the PowerPoint temporarily. Okay, so basically at this point, we're moving forward 1963. So we started the whole story in 1961. He would have visits about once a year, more or less. 2 more kids were born. 1963 was actually when the information that Eli Cohen collected became so valuable. So in January 1963, Israel attacked Syrian Air Force because they knew that the Syrian Air Force was not in a good condition through the fact that Eli Cohen gave that information. In addition, there were issues with water, especially regarding the Jordan River. So Eli Cohen actually gave the information about where they were attacking or where they were building so that Israel could act accordingly. And again, this is water, so this was very crucial to know the information. But basically, it was after this attack on the Syrian Air Force that somebody from the high up in the leadership, since early 1964, had suspected there was some mole, because he said, I'm listening to the radio or I'm looking at this attack, and there's no way that this attack could have happened without them having inside information. So there was suspicion already arising then in 1964. They did try to follow up regarding radio waves, but nothing came up of it. Okay, so now I'm going back to the presentation. Okay. Okay, so in June 1965, so basically his last visit in Israel was in 1964, and Nadia has explained that Eli Cohen was expressed, that he was tired, that he had a heavy heart, that he wasn't as enthusiastic and excited as he usually was in his previous visits. And I apologize, I didn't mention this earlier, but basically also in 1963, a major change happened in the military, and there was a revolution, and Amin al-Khatis, who I mentioned beforehand, actually became the leader in Syria. So therefore, that attack that I mentioned in January 1963 was so precise, and the additional information that he had afterwards, because these were the people that were his friends. These are the people that he had communicated with. That military attaché that he knew from Buenos Aires was now the Syrian leader, and he basically was betraying all of his friends. Beforehand, it was people who were part of the leadership in a sense, but not the people who were the leadership. And now all these people who he had grown ties with, had become friends with, had strong connections to, were the military and government leaders that he was in fact betraying by reporting every night to Israel. So I'm going to go back to this picture once again and basically say what happened and what went wrong, because clearly we know that Eli Cohen was found out. So in January 1965 is when the change happened, or when something occurred. And basically, in this military base that we see over here, they were getting new radios from the Soviet Union. And in order to replace the radios, they were going to turn off their system for 24 hours. Again, as I mentioned beforehand, the reason Eli Cohen was here, because there was radio signals all the time. Eli Cohen did not know about the change. And therefore, when he broadcasted that night to Israel, the army base picked up on the signal. They realized that it was coming from his house, but thought no way could it be from Kamil Amin Thabit. He's such a friend and etc. So they waited the following night. They saw that there was again radio waves coming from his house. So the following day is when the Syrian police barged into his house and actually caught him red-handed. He had the radio waves and materials completely in front of him. And there was no question about the fact that he was sending radio messages to a different country. And they had found out that it was Israel. He was tortured. And only in January 24th, 1965, was it exposed that they had caught Eli Cohen, the Israeli spy. At the time, Israel was trying to keep it censored or under wraps, because there were many efforts in order to try to save Eli. But basically what happened is that he was a few months later tried behind closed doors. This is a picture from his trial. The people who were in the trial were people that he knew. He had nobody defending him. It really was a mock trial. His sentence was already known from when it started, and they sentenced him to death, of course. And they continued torture afterwards as well, to really try to get the secrets of what he actually told Israel and what information actually was exposed. But take into account that all these people had known Eli for years upon years, or known Kamil Amin Thabit for years upon years. So this was really, truly a big deal in the Syrian government that Eli was found out as a spy. At the time as well, though, the only people who really didn't know about the fact that he was caught was his family. His brother, his wife Nadia, and his mother were told that he was exposed. His mother did not even know he was a spy, and so when she was told the information, she collapsed. But they immediately tried to have international support, and they received the help of a known French attorney, who his name is apologies, I don't remember his name. Here, I think it's Jonathan, but he was a known French attorney, and he actually went to Damascus himself in order to visit and try to change the situation, but with no success. And he also tried to get the help of international support, whether it was Red Cross, the Pope, England, Italy, who all had signed in order for him to be pardoned and released. Nothing helped. And on May 16th, 1965, Eli Cohen was hung. But the picture on the left is actually a few minutes before he was hung. This is the rabbi of Damascus, Nissim Andevo, who he spoke to minutes before he was taken out and hung in the main square in Damascus. And basically the following day after he was hung, he became a legacy and a hero, an Israeli hero. And Eli Cohen actually gave a letter to the rabbi in order to pass on to his family. And I'll read the letter that we see here. My dear Nadia, my dear family, I write to you these last words with the hope that you will always stay united. I ask my wife to forgive me, to take care of herself, and to provide an education for our children. Dear Nadia, you are allowed to remarry so that our children will have a father. In this subject, you are completely free. I ask you not mourn on the past, but to look towards the future. I send you last kisses. Pray for the rising of my soul. Yours, Eli. And as I said, the following morning is that when completely it was exposed who he was, and he has become ever since a true Israeli hero. And his legacy has been a big part of Israeli society, whether it is streets being named after him, or a memorial right outside the Mossad in his memory. Yitzhak Rabin going to his askara, to his memorial, and visiting the family, or a whole website dedicated to Eli Cohen and actually having a trail in the Golan named after him. I can see if I can close up. So the trip is called the Eli Cohen Trail, and it is 75 kilometers, 2 to 4 hour hike. But that does exist as well. And we see, really a lot of things that are done in order to really keep his memory alive. And there are a few things I'll say before we go to part 2 of this session, is that one thing is that the story is not completely over because his body was never returned, so he does not have a grave of his own. And because he was exposed and tortured and hung, there have been criticism towards the request that the Mossad had. What really gave him away was the fact that he was broadcasting once a day, but even more than once a day sometimes when it really wasn't necessary. He would often pass materials and documents and information that really they could have gotten without Eli broadcasting it. And there's been a lot of criticism about, rather than being more discreet and trying to hide and be very careful, they in fact didn't really do much, or didn't make much effort, and actually caused suspicion to be risen after that attack in 1963, rather than really keeping that low radar. So there is definitely criticism towards the Mossad about how they treated Eli as a spy, and how perhaps Mossad has to improve the way they treat spies in the future, or what they need to request from their spies, especially in such a dangerous location. I don't know if you have any questions about the actual story of Eli Cohen. Feel free to just write it in the chat. I am going to go immediately to the second part about the modern adaptations that we see today on Eli Cohen, but we'll just take a quick sip of water. It has been a long day. So with that, I will now be going to really how he's presented today, or how the story is presented today, and also how Israelis perceive it, or what is correct or not correct, basically. So firstly, I just want to show books that have been written about Eli Cohen. Since 1965, there have been books written about Eli Cohen, and this is from the Eli Cohen website that I mentioned a little bit earlier. These are, just want to show, a list. There are about a dozen different books, and you can see different languages as well, in Arabic. There's one in English. There's more in English, by the way. But just to really show, a variety of different covers. And this is a kid's book as well. So we really have a variety of books that have been written. The first one, 1965, so right when he was killed. And the most recent book was actually written in 2020. It was a kid's book about Eli Cohen. It was for teens, but a kid's book that's written in 2020. So really, it's a story that people keep telling. It's something that's very important to Israeli society. He's become, really a true legacy that people really connect to the story as well. Great. So with that, I will now continue with my PowerPoint. And I'll say that besides also the books, there are documentaries as well, and most of them stay true to his story. Of course, there are adaptations if it's a children's book, or if it's focusing on a specific story about Eli Cohen, but generally what I saw regarding reviews, they were typically true to his story. The first movie, though, that we see that was done about Eli Cohen is this movie, The Impossible Spy, from 1987. And before I go to talk about what was in this movie, I'll show you the trailer. But I'm also purposely showing just the cover of the movie, and just look at pictures of Eli Cohen. How he was in a suit, official businessman, and how he is on the cover of this film. There's a difference there. So I'm going to now, okay. So I'm going to now share the trailer first, and then I will share about the specifics regarding the movie. One moment. The YouTube trailer is not working. One moment. Okay, we'll try to open it very quickly. If not, then, okay. Okay, for whatever reason, there's an error happening, so I apologize that I can't show the trailer. Hopefully the spy is working. Okay, let's check one more time. Here. Okay, I apologize, just as an error occurred. It worked for me beforehand. I don't know what's going on. But basically, I'll just say that regarding the spy, I'll send the link to the trailer tomorrow, hopefully when it is working. So what we can see, first of all, looking at the cover, is that we get the westernized opinion of what an Arab should be looking like, and not the spy as we saw before, that he was in a tux. He looked, like a businessman. He didn't look like the Arab that we as Westerners often imagine an Arab to be. And in addition, the only actual review that I saw was a New York Times review, which I'll share as well tomorrow, basically saying that although they did cover most of the story, the fact that it was in English kind of lost its effect, meaning that the whole dialogue was in English and not in the original language that it took place, Arabic or Hebrew. And in addition was that they didn't have all the information due to the fact that there were security issues. So the directors actually added their own information or their own opinions when they couldn't receive that information. And there's a quote that they actually say in the review that says, "When does a docudrama become fiction or pure propaganda?" So really that question is left regarding this movie as well, that perhaps the facts here are not really completely true, and that needs to be taken into account regarding the story of Eli Cohen. And with that, I will now go to the main what was generally known regarding Eli Cohen and the Spy currently, which is because of this, The Spy with Sacha Baron Cohen, which came out in 2019. It's a Netflix miniseries, and hopefully this trailer will work. We'll see in just a moment. Here, I'm gonna try 1 second. Okay, looks like it is working. Here we go.
Do you consider yourself a patriot?
I love this country with all my might.
Welcome to Syria.
If your country needed you to lie to your friends, your family, your wife, would you do it?
I will be a buyer working for the government.
If your country asked you to risk your life, would you do it?
This is the opportunity for me to give you the life that I promised you, Daddy.
My name is Kamel Amin Thabit.
The Sheikh is your only way in. Please join me.
You've made a nice life for yourself here in Damascus.
When you walk into your room, everyone wants a piece of you.
Come in. Enjoy.
You can trust me with your life. I hope I can do the same. We all have secrets.
This is not a game, Kamel. You are either him or you are dead.
Nadia, I'm worried about you. When's the last time you saw Eli? 11 months ago.
Don't leave us.
I don't want to go back.
You are saving lives, Ellie. Remember that.
When I first became Kamel, it was just an act.
You mumble in your sleep. You sometimes shout out names.
Those nightmares that she was talking about, they're not even mine, they're Kamel's.
Let's have an open, honest conversation on what my husband does.
Taking off the clothes, it doesn't work anymore. I can't put him away.
Kamel isn't real. That life isn't real. You are Eli Cohen. You need to remember that.
It's a bit late for that.
Okay, so I will just be honest that I have a very sensitive soul, and I have not. I saw the first episode of it, and I could not see anymore. John, my husband, has since very much wanted to see it, but I can't. I know the story, as you can see, but it's very hard for me to watch the series itself. I'm very much, comedy type person. So for those who've seen it, I'll just say that I saw reviews that were very different in the US compared to Israel, even in the level of the headlines. So I'm just going to go back, and I'm have to go back and forth from the presentation because I just want to purely translate the headlines and they don't really appear well here. Okay. Oop. So I had my wonderful husband who works at Mosaic sent me this article about the spy. And as you can see, that Netflix, The Spy, manages to convey the ethnic irony at the heart of Eli Cohen's life. So we can already see from the headline that it's pretty positive. He says he gives praise to Sacha Baron Cohen, who really takes the part seriously compared to other movies that he's appeared in. It also brings up the ethnic tension that Eli Cohen is on the outside in Israeli society, but actually, he's actually, because of that, chosen as a spy because he's the one who knows 5 languages, who's able to go into Damascus and represent Israel, and that ethnic irony in the case, which I mentioned in the headline, and he really doesn't have many bad things to say. He says that it's not completely precise, that yes, they could have gone more into it, but really, all in all, it's a good review, that the show is pretty good. Now, if we look at the headlines in the Israeli media, they're far from complimentary. So just here, there's 2 here, and I'll translate them. So the one on the top is from it's from Globes, which is actually generally a economic paper, but it says Eli because in Hebrew the show is called Eli. A heroic story that turned into an American cliche. And the bottom left is from Israel Hayom, another newspaper that said this is actually an interview with Nadia, who I'll show a better picture of in the next slide, but this is a picture of her here. She says, when I watched the show about Eli, I became sick. Every scene was like a slap in the face. So very hard, difficult headline. I just want to read the last one from Israel Hayom, which actually was, they had the worst criticism about the show. So how did you call it? So the Netflix series about Eli Cohen is so simple, it is painful. I'll just go back to this and basically, just to summarize in a few main points about what exactly their criticism was. So one was a technical complaint that when Eli Cohen was in Israel, I don't know if you saw it in the trailer or in the show itself, but the colors are dull, meaning it's not bright, it seems, dark, it's dull. When he's in Syria and Damascus, it's technicolor, it's bright, like this is the dream. And that comparison and that message bothered a lot of critics. It bothered a lot of Israelis too, as well. And the other thing that bothered them was the fact that it was in English. When you have other shows like Fauda or Shtisel or Tehran that now came out that are purely in Hebrew or Arabic, or we're talking about Shtisel, it's purely in Hebrew and Yiddish. And you have shows that are popular that are spoken in the original language. Why did they take away that effect with Eli Cohen when the whole unique story of his was the fact that he was speaking Hebrew and Arabic. That was the whole story. Another thing was the fact that there were issues regarding when they interesting to point out is that the previous film was actually filmed in Israel, whereas The Spy was filmed in Budapest and Morocco. So because of that, they really didn't have completely authentic clothes or that it fit the time period. There were a lot of little pieces like that that didn't really fit completely. And another thing was that the main criticism throughout the Israeli articles was that basically they turned the spy into American spy drama story rather than the Israeli Zionist ideology, cultural story that had to do with what Israel was going through at the time. This is the early 60s. The Mossad has claimed that what Eli Cohen found was extremely helpful to the Six-Day War that happened just 2 years after Eli Cohen was hung. So we're talking about a young country, an individual who was filled with Zionism and passion in a country that has since remembered his legacy and he has become a hero. So therefore, when you're talking to critics who have been told since their childhood who Eli Cohen is, because they read the book, or they, heard in their army base about Eli Cohen, seeing the show doesn't seem to show respect. And even the criticism from Haaretz said that the show is an insult to collective memory in Israel, that they should have focused on the psychological and Israeli tension, focusing more on the fact that Eli Cohen was from, Egyptian descent, and he was an outsider in Israel at the time, but he was, the agent and the spy of the Mossad because he was able to be going into Syria and he knew how to speak their language. Another thing was that he had a psychological issue because of the fact that he was betraying these leaders in Syria who were his friends at the end of the day, who had become his close colleagues. And rather than focusing on those things and the historical and cultural context, it felt more like an American spy show, a James Bond type show, that the focus was the operational side rather than the story of Eli Cohen. Again, this is why I'm summarizing the Israeli article, so if you don't agree, I'm happy to hear afterwards, and we're almost towards the end. And another thing was that they showed Nadia as submissive, who just accepted it, and she didn't have much of a character according to the critics. And now with that, I'm actually the picture up top left over here. This is Sophie, his daughter, and she was interviewing in the Daily Mail. I'm going to actually read a quote of hers right after this. I do want to show though a picture of Nadia. So this is Nadia, and this is Sophie. And the family also had criticism about the show as well, and Nadia's criticism is divided into three. Nadia really didn't like the fact that Sacha Baron Cohen played Eli. She said it was an insult to Eli because, as many of you know, with Borat coming out recently, Sacha is more known for his comedic roles, and although he took this role seriously, when you have an actor his only roles are comedy, it really raises a question of, the fact that they chose him to play Eli Cohen. She also mentioned that the fact that there was no Zionism mentioned in the series, and the fact that he only did this because of his ideology and because of those roots he had in the 1950s, promoting Zionism. And the producers of the show did not speak to her or the family, and they got all their information from the Mossad. So there was a hint, the fact that she had a lover or somebody who was interested in her when Eli wasn't away. And she really did not like the fact that was hinted. She also really, after Eli Cohen was hung, she never remarried. So she really was faithful and truthful, and probably took it as a personal insult that was even hinted in that case. So, and I just want to read Sophie's quote before I open up for questions, and then I will also conclude as well. So Sophie in the Daily Mail says, "It showed my father as a flamboyant, big-spending womanizer who took reckless risks because he had feelings of inferiority. In truth, My father was very sure of himself and very strong and happy with his life. He was not so poor and miserable. He was the best the Mossad had. The drama was not a compliment for my father or my family. So that is the feelings of his own family members regarding the show. And I'll just conclude and say that this also came up with the Eichmann series, and also beforehand, that once we take a story make it into Hollywood, there are certain changes that happen. There are certain updates or little things that they make it to be more interesting. And the question is this: I believe that if the Netflix show was not on Netflix, that a lot of people would have never heard of Eli Cohen or Camille Amin Thabit, and they wouldn't have checked Wikipedia, they wouldn't have checked the documentary, they would have never heard his name. So yes, perhaps it's not completely true, and for Israelis, it's an insult and to collective memory. So the show is not targeting Israelis; it was targeting Americans. And perhaps for that just knowledge of Israeli legacy and Israeli history, it's worth paying that price. And that's a question that each person has to answer themselves. I feel like a lot of Israelis would say that it's not worth it. Maybe Americans say that it is. It's really the question that's up in the air. But I think it's also important, as Jews and with that connection to Israel, to really know the true story and read the interviews of Sophie and Nadia and his other children, Irit and Shai as well, who've spoken up, and to really hear about their father and about the legacy, and read the books and see the documentaries and the real information, because the Hollywood story is definitely not enough. And if we had that knowledge, we can get the full story altogether. So I will definitely be sending you the additional material so you can check all that out yourself. But that's it for me for now. And the next session is on December 3rd, and it will be about Entebbe. So we're moving forward chronologically. So we started with just the background of the Mossad, then 1960 to Eichmann. This is 1965 with Eli Cohen. And the next will be 1970s with Entebbe. I hope that's how you say it. Am I saying it correctly? Okay. Because in Hebrew you say Entebbe, so I don't know how to do the American pronunciation. And it is December 3rd. The time is 7:30. There's a different time on the program guide. It's always 7:30. And it's the same link as well, but I will send a reminder to anyone who has already registered. So no need to register again. I will send an email the day before. And with that, I will be happily answering questions. So I see that most people sent it to me privately. So here, I will start reading the questions, and then I will answer. And if you have more questions, feel free to do it either to me or also to everyone as well. Or maybe you can't do to everyone. Oh, I apologize. I teach third graders, and then that's why I have only to host only. So now you can send to everyone as well. Okay. Renee asks, did they know he was an Israeli early on? So Eli Cohen was sent into Syria in 1961. He was only found out in 1964. So basically, he was a spy, completely believed to be Syrian from Buenos Aires and this businessman persona for 3 full years before he was found out and hung. Okay. The next question is by Stu. It said, when he spoke Arabic, what dialect was it? Egyptian or Syrian? From what I know, it was Syrian, and that he knew the dialects. He knew to speak 5 languages, so he knew the specific dialects he needed to say in order to have that persona that he was Syrian. Although I think that he might have been known that he had Egyptian descent, but he had those Syrian roots and definitely spoke the dialect that would not be suspicious. Jonathan asks, what major changes have taken place within the Mossad to better protect their Israel secret agent operatives? And do you know if any of Eli Cohen's children go into the Mossad, Shin Bet, or another Israeli secret service? So I do not know how Israel improved their spies because I don't work in the Mossad. And clearly the fact that we don't know about many spies goes to show that they probably did. except, you have Jonathan Pollard afterwards. So there's something that happened there. But there's clearly something that is done, and none of his kids were involved with the Mossad afterwards. I don't actually know where they served in the army, but they're more known. Sophie's the one who mostly speaks out. I haven't seen anything with Irit or Shai, but yeah. So I think there's one more question. Did Hafiz al-Assad plan or put into action any retaliatory actions or plots based on their humiliation by Eli Cohen and the Israeli government? Well, there are many different things that happened, but the main one was called the 6-Day War. So that was definitely something that was built up and plotted against Israel to really try to annihilate. And it really was a miracle that Israel won the 6-Day War. And definitely the Syrians were plotting and doing that, preparing for that major war. In addition, besides the fact that they hated Israel and did not believe, that it should be there, but Eli Cohen was definitely another major factor to that additional hatred and the 6-Day War specifically. Stu asks, what was the Israeli reaction to the older movie? Stu, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, I couldn't find. It's from 1987. I just couldn't find records online regarding, reviews about the Israeli movie, about Israeli opinion about the movie. The only thing I really found was the New York Times thing, and that's what I quoted. I'll send it to you, and you can have your opinion, and that's why I really focused on The Spy, just because I couldn't find the materials, and I apologize I didn't have more information regarding that. And Tybal is saying, okay. That basically Tybal is saying that TV shows are made to make profit, that people shouldn't expect that it should be precise or accurate completely, although there is an expectation to be sensitive to the family and to Israelis. So you are correct, but at the same time, we always check how true stories are. So when it's always based on a true story or something of the sort, I know I personally always actually check what was the real story and how true is it to the story. So when you have something that's such a big part of Israeli legacy, you really are checking, how true is it, or how meaningful it is to, or how if is it actually respecting the Israeli legacy in that case. But you are correct that maybe should not be the expectation. And then Alan also adds, the difference between reality and Hollywood is called poetic license. The history is changed, so the story is more widely accepted, and that's exactly it. The Israelis are aware of that. They're aware that, certain things will be changed and, made Hollywood style in order for it to be attractive and bring viewers. But at the same time, when you are Israeli and there's a story that's really part of your legacy, then it feels like a personal insult when it's on the big screen and it's not completely true. And I guess that's something that's unique about Israeli society, where because, and this is my personal opinion and perspective, that because we're in a society where we all go into the army, we all come together when there's a war, we all know that we're surrounded by enemies, that we know that any moment, God forbid, somebody we know could be attacked for whatever reason because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. We feel for those families who have been in horrible situations. It's part of us. It's part of our collective. And that's why that the critic in Haaretz said that it's an insult to the collective memory in Israel. It probably is a unique story, but I feel that there are, a few American tales that if they were made into a movie, that those certain patriots would be insulted that they weren't done completely correct. And so you have those particular stories that people are particularly patriotic about. And I think that the story of Eli Cohen is definitely one of those. So those seem to be all the questions. I was asked also if there's an Israeli James Bond. Not that I know of. I feel like Eli Cohen is the closest to that, to be honest. And he's real. So we don't really have a figure like that. Israeli movies is not so advanced. the Israeli movies are not so advanced that we have money to do series upon series and movies upon movies of a particular spy. So the December subject is Entebbe. The January one, somebody asked, I'm still deciding what exactly I want to do. I have a few ideas in my head, but I'll announce it by the December session. So thank you again for joining, and Laila Tov. And I hope to see you next week in my 2 sessions. We have a movie screening, Salach Shabati, which is actually about the people who moved from Northern Africa. So we'll be seeing that and hearing from Noah, who is in the area. She's actually my boss as the Shlicha. And also we have a panel of women about the variety of Judaism, which men are open to as well. And that's on Thursday at 1 p.m. You could check the B'nai website for registration and particular information. Again, thank you for joining, and Laila Tov. Bye, everyone.
Thank